Alright guys, welcome to the beginning of this long journey to make a full third-person character rig. Today we are starting incredibly slowly and setting up the project and creating a small area for our character to move around in. Setting up a basic character to get us up and running. We are also going to set up the world environment and lighting so that the game looks a little bit nicer. If we wanted to create a third-person shooter, we're really going to need to make our camera orbit around the player to allow us to look around. This can be achieved in a number of different ways, and I'm going to show you how I like to do it. But before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. If you want the full course now, you can become a channel member or join my Patreon for all episodes upfront. Not into monthly payments? Don't worry. Buy the course outright on Udemy and get lifetime access. Links below. Now let's get started. If you're not familiar with Godot, and this is for your first time using it, you probably won't have projects here. For us, since it's a new project, we're going to click create. We can give this project a name. I'm just going to call this third person shooter tutorial. And the project path. Now this needs to be set. It has to be empty. Create a folder. So if you've got a folder to hold it in, that's great. This one is actually going to be the overview folder. So I'm going to create a new folder and just call it project. Yours can be anything. It doesn't really matter, although it is good to keep things clear. And then I'm just going to select that folder. And you'll see a little tick here and it says create folder. You don't have to select that. I don't need that. I think it'll throw an error if you choose something that is not empty. So if I come back up here and select this one, it says the selected path is not empty. Choosing an empty folder is highly recommended for that. So we just click create and edit here. Now, while we're waiting for that to open up, it shouldn't take too long, but what we'll do is we'll pop over to a website called kenny.nl. This is a really good place to get CC0 assets. Now, if you've never heard that term, CC0 is an asset that you can use without needing to give credit or pay the creator. And Kenny has very graciously given a lot to the community, and there are a lot of assets that you can download for free and that you don't have to pay for and use in your commercial projects if you want to. Now I'm going to go to textures and I'm going to just download this prototype texture. This is just going to help us with the world and making a world that is nice to look at rather than just using flat textures. Okay, and you can just download that. You might want to create a new folder within your project. And I'm just going to call mine assets, and I'm going to save anything that I download off the internet here. So I'm going to click open and save. I'll navigate to that, and I'm actually going to unzip this, and we'll just remove the zip folder. And so that would just be left with the Kenny prototype. Now, if we click back into Godot, that's all opened up now. It should scan that and see that it's there. Sometimes it's a bit slow, but there you go. It's re-importing the assets. If you ever find that it's not doing that, you can also come to project and click reload current project, and it should pick it up on the next load. Okay, so now we've got a blank project. We've got some prototype textures, and we've got nothing in the world. So we want to sort of create, and what we're going to do in this first lesson is just sort of set up an environment for us to work in. So the very first thing that we want to do is just create a 3D scene. We can create a root node here. Every scene needs to have a root node. 3D scene is what we're going to use for this. I'm just going to call this world. You can call it whatever you want. It's not super important right now. And the best way to prototype, like we're going to do, and create this controller is generally to create CSG combiner. CSG combiners are really great for prototyping a level. You can use them. They're set up as union. And basically within this node, we can add subnodes, which are all these boxes, cylinders, meshes, and they will combine together to create a single mesh. So we can add that there, and you can see it's just a regular box. This is going to be our floor. So the Y variable, we can make it pretty thin, right? But the X and the Z, we probably want to give a fair amount of space to. So I'm going to make them 30 meters each. We'll also create a sort of an arena where the player can't escape from as well. Okay, so what we want to do is add a material. So we can see that there's a field here called material. And we can just click that and just select a new standard material 3D. And you're going to get given a lot of options. This is just a standard PBR shader if you're familiar with those. But the one thing we want to navigate to is albedo. We've got a color here and we've got a texture field. Now those textures that we downloaded earlier, we can open them up and we can go to the PNG. I like to use the dark texture just because it's nice to look at, and we can add that. Now you'll notice that it's quite big. It does still work in this scene, but it's probably a little bit too big. So we can navigate it down to UV1 and we can set that to triplanar. And it will instantly become a lot nicer to look at. And that's generally all we have to do for that to work. Now, what we can do, this is a pretty basic texture, so it's not that hard to set up again and again, but we do have the ability to save this. So we can click save and then assets under prototype textures probably is best. We can just save that as the prototype texture and then go, just so we know what it is. So that's saved. And now we can add it to all the other boxes and stuff that we add to this. All right, so we've got a world. We probably don't want the player to be able to leave it. So I'm going to duplicate this. So you can press Control D on your keyboard. You can right click and duplicate as well. And we'll get to the same size. But actually this one, I'm going to make it 29, just 1 meter wall. And for this one, we're actually going to select subtraction, right? We're going to raise it off the floor. Now it can just sit at 0.2, right? Now, if you look at this, if you don't know how to navigate as well, by the way, right click lets you look around like a first person shooter, and then you can use your WASD keys to navigate around. So if you look at this, now we know that this one is 0.1 and we can make this one 0.2 and it'll actually sit a little bit off the floor. And if you do have a numpad, you can always press 1 on the numpad to navigate to this. And we can see this sits up a little bit. So if we wanted to get this absolutely correct, we can grab these little arrows and we can navigate, or we can drag this down. You hold Control and Shift. You can also snap. And so we can see that it actually just needed to be 0.1 off. Right. And now what we want to do is just raise this up. So rather than using the fields here to set the size, we want to select this top one. That might be a little bit difficult given the height of it, but just grab that and drag it up. And that way, because if you set this in the selector field here, it's going to create space up and down from it. And we don't want that. We just want to go upwards from the top, right? Now it can be as tall as you want. It doesn't really matter. We're not going to make the player be able to jump that high. But this one here now, what we want to do is actually raise it up. And look what we're able to do. We're able to create a built-in box. And that looks pretty good, right? So now we have an area where our player can run around in, and it should be no problems for us to work out and create a third-person controller that looks nice. It's nice to look at. The other thing that we need to look at is collisions. Obviously, we want to collide. So we will need to make sure that the use collision box is selected on the CSG combiner. And we'll set it to layer 1. Now, the layer at the moment just says layer 1, but we actually probably want to name these layers. So we go up to project settings, and we can go in this left-hand area here. We can come down to layer names, and then you can come down to 3D physics. And so for layer 1, we can call it world. And we'll be coming back to this a lot as we add things like the character. We might put that on layer 2, and the enemies, they might go on layer 3. And so everything you should give a name as you go along, so you know that when you're trying to interact with something in a physical way, that you can interact with it and what layer it needs to be interacting with in order for it to target that. Right. We'll call that world. And now you can see as you hover over that, it says world. All right. So now we've got an area and we can see around it, but we don't have a player. So we need to add that. But first things first, I'm actually going to save this. So we're going to save it. We'll come back up. We can create a folder for this, not in assets. We'll just navigate to the top level and create a folder, and we'll call it world. Okay, so let's add a basic character. So we want to come back to the scene here, and we'll just click that plus button. And the thing that we need to add to the scene, or we want to add to the scene for a player, is a character body. You can see I made a mistake there. It used to be called kinematic body. It's called a character body now. And so we come to this and we'll click character body, and it's going to have a warning. You're not going to see anything. So the character body, it requires a few things for it to work properly, namely a collision shape. So if you click this warning, it's going to say this node has no shape, so it can't collide or interact with other objects. And so what we need to do is add a collision shape. So we click that plus again, and we can type that COLL, and you've got collision shape 3D, and you've got a number of different shapes to choose from. You'll also get a warning here, and it'll say a shape must be provided. And so if you come over to the right-hand side, you'll see the word shape, and it will be empty. Now we need to fill that. If you click it, we get a couple of options. Let's select capsule, right? And so now we can see a capsule. We'll grab the player, make sure you selected the character body 3D, not the collision shape, and just drag him up so that you can see the full capsule in the scene. You don't want it to be below the level of the floor. All right, and we can rename this. We've got character body 3D. We can double click on that and we can just type character. You can also type player. That's fine as well. I might type player. And so I'll give it a name so we know what it is. And we're almost there, right? I don't think we could run this right now. We need a camera, don't we? We can add a camera, same way as we have before. We can click that plus and we can type in camera and we get a camera 3D, right? We can add that to the scene. Now, cameras typically face in the negative Z, so we can just, you don't need to move it anywhere else except for just dragging it back in the negative Z direction. You can click down here to see transforms. I'm actually going to set this manually because I do want it to be a specific length. So under transforms, I'm going to click and add 2 meters to the Z, right? So now we can click preview. We can actually see the player because it doesn't have a mesh. So we can also add that. So we can come back up. We can click that plus again, and we want to type in mesh. Look for a mesh instance 3D. And we can add a mesh. It's really just going to be a placeholder for now, so don't worry too much about it. I'll choose capsule as well. You can see it very easily fills out that same collision shape. And the camera here, we can click preview and we can see we're probably still a little bit close. So I'm actually going to change this to say 5 meters. And to be fair, that's a little bit of a strange position. So I'm going to raise it up in Y, maybe 1, maybe 2. And then same with the rotation, you do want to be rotating the X and probably pointing it a little bit down, right? Looks pretty standard for a third person view. Potentially we'll have it offset like that. So let's just formalize these numbers. So we go 2 up, we'll go 1 point, let's go 1.5 off. These numbers will all change later on, but we're just going to play around with them. And I'll make this negative 20, right? So that's just a quick little starter that we've got here. And now we could run the game and we'll see our scene, all right? Obviously we can't interact, we can't move, we can't do anything, but we can see it. Now you might notice that it doesn't look quite the same. It's very dark compared to this one. There's no lighting. Now we've got these buttons here. This is actually what the scene looks like, but we've got like scene lighting. So you can actually click this 3 little dots here and you can add the sun to the scene and you can also add the environment to the scene. So then when you run the game, you'll see the exact same thing. You can always add them and make them look much prettier later on, but we're not going to worry about it too much. All right, so how can we make the player move? Godot comes with built-in scripts, so that we can do that within a click. The first thing that we do want to do though, is actually save the player, right, as a scene. So in Godot, you can create a scene, you can add scenes, and you can save them. And so we can save this as a scene so that we can work on it and we can save it. So we want to right click on it and just click Save Branch as Scene. We'll get that same thing. We're probably going to create a new folder here. I'm just going to call it player. And we'll save that scene as player. All right, so then we want to open this up. The one thing that we do want to do is actually reset the transforms that we set up here. So this, we raised him off the floor 1.1. Actually, just want to put that back. Just so that in the base scene, the root object is always zeroed out. That's fairly important to remember. It's not 100% a rule, but it is very nice to make sure that you do, so that when you add something to the scene, it shows up where you expect it to. All right, you can see our little guys and drop back down at the floor. So we'll just raise them back up. Okay, so now that we've got our player in this scene, we can add a script. We want to do this in the player scene rather than the world scene. We just want to click the little script looking icon here. It says attach a new or existing script to the selected node. We can click this. You'll see that there's an option to choose a language. We don't have anything else at the moment. We're just using GDScript. It inherits character body 3D, which is what this object is. And we have a template that we can use. So we can use no default, object empty, or character 3D basic movement. Now, right now we're going to use basic movement. We're actually going to remove that later on. But for now, we just add this in so we can get some movement going on. Built-in script is turned off. And the path, and that is fine for now. So we've got this, and it'll say script path name is valid. We'll create a new script file, right? So we'll create that. And you can see it populates these with a few things. Let's take a look at this. I'm just going to fill up the space here. So you've got the speed and the jump velocity, which is fairly straightforward to understand. This is how fast you're going to move. This is how high you're going to jump. It's fairly bulk standard code here. We've got if not is on floor, which basically means if you're not on the ground, you're going to fall. Velocity equals plus equals get gravity. If input just pressed UI accept, velocity y equals jump velocity. Those kind of things. Now there is some instructions here. It says get the input direction to handle the movement's declaration. As a good practice, you should replace UI actions with custom gameplay actions. So we're going to do that right now. So we come back to project and we'll go to project settings and we'll go input. Now you'll notice that it's completely empty. You can click this button here to show the default actions, but we'll turn that off for now. And so basically what you want to do is just type in here up and you come back straight to it, down, left, right, and you just press enter as you go. All right, and so we create a bunch of default actions and then I'll also create jump. And so you can click plus there and you can click that. And now it'll listen for input, which is pretty nice. So up, we obviously want that to be W. You can make it whatever you want. Down is S, left is A, almost forgot my left from right. Right is D. And jump will make that spacebar. Okay, and so you can just click those buttons as you go. And so now, obviously, we have to replace these actions. So we've got UI accept, which is set up to which is mapped to spacebar, but we're going to change that to jump. And then these, pretty easy. We can just change them from left, UI right to right, UI up to up, UI down to down, which is pretty straightforward. And so now all we have to do is essentially run the game and we should be able to see some movement. So I'm going to click, there's a couple of different buttons you can choose to press to run the game. Before we press this button, which is run the current scene, but now I'm going to press this button, which is run project. And you'll see that it says no main scene has been selected. You can change it later in the project settings under, and it wants you to select current. Obviously we're in the player scene, so we don't actually want to select current. We could, of course, navigate back to the world and click play, but I will show you how to choose a scene. So you can select, it'll just take you to the file navigator and we can navigate to world and we can choose world. It'll run that. Okay. And so now you'll notice that left, right, up and down, and we can jump. All right. So we're pretty close, but we don't have any mouse movement. So we can add that and it's pretty straightforward to do so. So there's a couple of considerations when adding the mouse movement that we're going to make. I'm going to talk to you about what I'm going to do, but just know that it's not 100% compulsory and there's a bunch of different ways that you could do this as well. So right now, all of the code is in this script in the player called the player, and it's handling all the movement, and that's fine. Now, you could put all the code here and handle the mouse movement here, but because what we're planning to make is quite complicated, what I like to do is to separate all the actions into individual scripts. And so the mouse movement will be handled by its own script, and that'll eventually become the camera management system, right? And so what I'm going to do here is create a new node. I'm going to add a node 3D, and I'm going to call that the camera system, or we could just call it camera. That's fine too. It's not that important. And we're going to add that camera 3D to the camera. And now we can add a script to that, and we'll click that same button again. We'll add a script. It can just be called camera. That's fine. And we'll click that. And we've got a couple of functions here built in, ready and process. We don't need process right now, so I'm going to remove it. Ready, we do want to keep. What is ready? Ready is a function that is from the built-in node 3D. You can click this little button if you want to go to it, and it's a virtual function, which means we need to set what it does, but it exists and is called when the scene is created, right? So one of the things you might have noticed if we run the game is that the mouse is just sitting here freely. Now, we don't actually want that because we're making a third-person shooter, so we actually want the mouse to be fully captured and controlled by the game. So it's actually pretty easy for us to do that. So the first thing we're going to do here is just type input.setMouseMode and then type input.mouseMode captured. Right. So what we're telling the system right now is to set the mouse mode to be captured. This is an enumerator. It's all controlled by this input class. Don't worry about it too much, but just know that what you do here will just make the mouse disappear. And so now we won't actually be able to escape. I'm going to press Alt F4. You could also tab out and close it. So if you're having trouble there, you can also tab out and then navigate back to it and close it there like that. So what we want to do as well is give us a way to get the mouse back as we do testing. So I'm going to create another function here. This is also another virtual function. It's called func_input. You can see it fills in everything for me here. So in this input function, we want to get the mouse capture back. So we'll go if event, which is the thing passed in from the input function, which is literally just key presses and mouse movement and all that kind of stuff, is action pressed. And this can scan for actions. UI cancel is the one I'm going to use, which is mapped to the escape key. And then we'll just go if we're going to check the mouse mode, which is basically what we set up here. If input.get mouse mode is equal to, and I'm just going to copy because I'm feeling a bit lazy, input mouse mode captured. Then we're going to, and we'll just copy this entire thing, input, but make sure we change it here to mouse mode visible. And we'll just change that there. All right. And then we can say else here with input set mouse mode captured. And so what that will do is allow us to press the escape key to show and hide the mouse as we see fit, depending on what we're trying to do, which is really helpful. All right, so let's continue. So in order to rotate the camera, we can actually get information from the game about how the mouse is being moved. There exists an object called an input event mouse motion. So we can actually check for that. We can say if event, and we can say is input event mouse motion, right? And so that will tell us that the input that's being put through this function is mouse motion. And from that, we can actually get information about how far the mouse has moved. So we can create a variable here and we'll just call it mouse event, and it's a vector2, and it's going to be equal to event.screenRelative. Now, if you're ever curious about what something is, you can always control click the item. So if you ever have questions about something, maybe I don't explain it, you can always control and then click this and it'll take you to the function. And so you can see here, there's some information here. The unscaled mouse position relative to the previous position in the coordinate system of the screen, position at the last frame. So it tells you how much the mouse has moved since the last frame. Since input event mouse motion is only emitted when the mouse moves, the last event won't have a relative position of vector200. When the user stops moving the mouse, this coordinate is not scaled according to the content scale or factor calls upon. This should be preferred over relative or mouse aiming when using the input mouse mode captured, regardless of the project's stretch mode. So it says this is what you should use. Right, so we've got screen relative here. We can go next and we can move the camera based on how much that has been moved. And so I'm going to create a function for this so it's a little bit easier for us to understand. So I'm going to come down here and create a function called camera look, and it's going to take mouse movement and it'll be a vector2. Remember, I've got typing turned on, and we also need to return void. And now what that means is that we're just not going to return anything from this function. I'm just going to put pass in here and we can have a look at what we need to make this function work. First thing we need to do is we need to track our camera rotation. So I'm going to create a variable up the top here, and it's just going to be called camera rotation. And it's obviously a vector2, just like everything else. And we'll set it equal to vector2.0. And so that just means it starts from 0. Okay, and the first thing we do in this camera look function is we go to camera rotation and we add the mouse movement. All right, so every time we move the mouse, we're going to add to this camera rotation variable. Now we're going to do a couple of things here to make the rotation work. There's a number of different ways that you might have seen people do this, but I like to follow the way that Godot recommends, which is using basis here. So we're just going to go transform.basis equals basis. Don't worry too much about these functions. Just know that they need to exist. And then we just need to call rotate object local. All right. It requires an axis. Now we could set these, but I'm just going to type them in. It'll be a vector3 if you imagine that we're rotating in 3D space. we can go back to 3D and we can have a look at this. So you can imagine that this object is rotating in 3D space. We're rotating the X variable here. Now you see the little red arrow, which is the X axis this way. We're rotating around that. So we rotate X, which is our up and down. And then same for the Y. This is up and down. This is the Y axis here. It goes up and down, and we're rotating around it, which is actually our left and right. So it seems a little bit counterintuitive, but just try to understand it that way. And we'll pass in a vector 3. Now, we need to do this in a very specific order. We first need to rotate in the Y-axis. So we'll go 0, 1, 0. And then the next is the camera rotation. So we'll actually need to make this a negative. We want to go camera rotation dot X. So the X movement of the mouse needs to translate to that Y rotation, right? And then we'll go rotate object local, and we'll pass in a vector 3 again, and this will be the vector 3, 1, 0, 0, and this can be the negative camera rotation dot Y. Okay, so now that we've written that, we need to call this function after the input event mouse motion. So after this, we've stored this mouse event in screen relative, and we'll just call the function camera look, and we'll pass in mouse event. All right, so let's run this here, and you can see that it's quite fast. So the thing that we want to add is sensitivity, right? You see it in games all the time, mouse sensitivity. So we'll create a variable here. We'll call it mouse sensitivity, and it will be equal to a float here. And we're going to make this actually pretty small, 0.001. And we'll take that variable and we'll actually multiply our mouse event dot screen relative by the mouse sensitivity. And that should help us slow down a little bit. And now, as you can see, we're rotating from left to right and up and down. But you'll notice that we can rotate up and all around, and that's not ideal. So we probably want to set a clamp for the vertical motion of the camera. So we can set a couple of variables here. We can set a variable for max rotation, max vertical rotation, max Y rotation. I'm not the best at naming variables, guys. And so we can call this a float. And rotation is normally handled by Godot in radians. So normally you might think of it as like 180 degrees or something like that. But radians are between 0 and pi, right? So we're going to actually set this to 1.5. And so what we can do is right under this, we can actually clamp camera rotation. So we can go camera rotation dot Y is equal to clamp, and we add in camera rotation dot Y. The minimum amount will be the negative max Y rotation, and the maximum amount will just be the max Y rotation. And so now if we run that, we'll be able to prevent our rotation. And to be honest, that still feels like quite a lot on the top. Don't worry about the floor. We'll fix that a little bit later. And so I actually think I'm going to make this like 1.2. Just play around with that variable. It's okay if you find something that you like a little bit less. It's hard to test the ground, but that's about high and how high you want it. Okay. And so now we have a character that goes around wherever we want. But you might have noticed that the rotation of the character is not matched when we go around the camera. And the reason for that is because we're rotating the camera here. Now, there's a couple of different ways that we can go about achieving that rotation, the character following the rotation. The easiest of them would be to rotate the character rather than rotate the camera. So what we'll do is we'll actually create a new kind of variable here, which is going to be an export variable. And it's just going to be called the character, and it's going to be equal to a character body 3D. Now, this variable here will allow us in the selector to choose the character. Now, I've set this up so it has to be a character body 3D, which means it's always going to be the parent. You could use other variables like owner to get access to that, but I like this just in case you want to change it later on, you just change the type and you can choose something else. But I'm going to select this. And so the character is set in the inspector as the player. And so now instead on the X rotation, which is the left and right rotation, which is actually the Y rotation, on the Y rotation here, which is our mouse X movement, we want to rotate the character instead, right? Character.rotate object local. And the other thing we need to remember as well is to also set the basis. So character.transform.basis equals basis. And now as we run the game, we should rotate the character, and this will allow the movement of the character to be directed by the camera movement, right? So, and the reason for this is in this direction, we're multiplying the direction by the transform basis, which we're also updating here, right? So you can see how this rotation affects the input. And so the forward will always be the forward basis. So that's sort of how that kind of works at a very cursory level. And so now you'll see that we've got a very, very basic but functional third-person controller here. We can move around, we can jump. Our camera rotates through a lot of things, which we can fix fairly easily, and we might do that in the next episode. All right, guys, that is all for this episode. Hopefully you're getting excited. In the next couple of episodes, we're going to fine-tune our camera controls so that they're ready for when we add a character rig. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you want immediate access to every single episode in this course, you can become a channel member or join the Patreon. And if you want lifetime access, you can always jump over to Udemy and buy it there. I'll see you guys all next week.